The smallest tip in the room revealed the biggest poverty no bank statement could ever measure. No one looked up when the crisp $5 bill landed beside a dinner check that totaled $1,348. The soft clink of crystal glasses continued beneath the warm glow of handcrafted chandeliers. Conversations about mergers, luxury homes, and weekend flights to Aspen floated through the elegant dining room as though nothing unusual had happened. But one pair of eyes noticed. Claire Bennett paused for barely a heartbeat before reaching for the leather folder resting quietly on table 14. She had spent 7 hours moving through the restaurant with effortless grace, balancing heavy trays, remembering complicated orders without writing them down, smiling with genuine warmth at exhausted parents, celebrating an elderly couple's anniversary with complimentary cheesecake, and making every guest feel seen. None of that had changed because of the $5 bill. Her expression remained calm, neither offended nor amused, simply thoughtful. Across the room, Nathan Carter adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit without taking his eyes off her. Few people realized that the 41-year-old billionaire enjoyed experiments far more than investments. Markets followed numbers. People followed emotion. Or so he believed. During the last decade, he had quietly developed a habit that none of his board members knew existed. Whenever he dined somewhere new, he intentionally left an unusually small tip. Not because he needed the money. Not because he disliked the service. He wanted to observe what happened next. Anger, disappointment, sarcasm, forced politeness. Every reaction became another piece of evidence supporting the theory that everyone had a price and that dignity often disappeared when money entered the conversation. It was a game he had never lost. Until tonight. Claire opened the folder with steady hands. She glanced at the receipt once, then at the $5 bill. She neither sighed nor frowned. She simply slipped the bill beneath the receipt so it would not slide onto the polished hardwood floor. Then she picked up the folder and walked away with the same relaxed pace she had used all evening. Nathan leaned back in his chair. That was unexpected. Most people reacted within seconds. Some chased him before he reached the valet stand. Others whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. A few smiled through clenched teeth while silently judging him. Claire did none of those things. She disappeared into the service station without looking in his direction. His longtime friend Ethan, who had joined him for dinner, chuckled as he reached for his espresso. You think she noticed? Nathan never took his eyes off the hallway leading toward the kitchen. She noticed. Then why didn't she react? Nathan answered with quiet confidence. Everyone reacts. Sometimes they just take longer. He checked the time on his Swiss watch. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The restaurant continued moving with elegant precision. Servers crossed paths like dancers who had rehearsed together for years. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's glowing skyline. Still nothing. Claire reappeared carrying a tray of desserts for another table. She laughed softly at something an elderly customer said before placing a slice of pecan pie in front of him with careful hands. A young couple thanked her for recommending the bread pudding. She wished them a wonderful evening before refilling another guest's coffee without being asked. There was no trace of resentment. No performance. No hidden irritation waiting to surface. Nathan found himself watching more carefully than before. Not because she was serving him anymore. She wasn't. She had already moved on. Yet somehow he had not. Something about her composure unsettled him in a way quarterly losses never could. It felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. His entire career had been built on predicting behavior before anyone else could. Investors called it vision. Competitors called it instinct. Nathan privately called it mathematics. Human nature always added up. Except tonight, the equation refused to balance. Claire returned to the service station once more, placed the receipt on the counter, reached for a pen, and quietly wrote a single sentence on the back before closing the folder again. She handed it to the restaurant manager with a polite smile. Would you mind giving this back to the gentleman at table 14 before he leaves? The manager nodded without asking questions. Nathan watched the exchange from across the room. His curiosity replaced confidence for the first time that evening. He had expected a complaint, an argument, perhaps even a lesson directed at him. Instead, whatever she had written remained hidden inside a simple leather folder resting silently in another person's hands. And somehow, That silence carried more weight than any speech he had ever heard. The restaurant manager crossed the dining room with the same quiet professionalism that defined every movement inside Bellamy House. He stopped beside Nathan's table and gently placed the leather folder where it had rested only minutes before. "Miss Bennett asked me to return this to you, sir," he said with a courteous smile before walking away without another word. Nathan glanced at Ethan, then reached for the folder with the confidence of a man who believed he already understood how every story ended. He expected sarcasm, perhaps a pointed remark about generosity, maybe even a lecture disguised as politeness. Instead, he unfolded the receipt and turned it over. Only one sentence appeared in neat handwriting. "Thank you for showing me that character is always a choice, even when no one is watching." Nathan stared at the words much longer than he intended. They were neither angry nor passive. There was no accusation hidden between the letters, no request for a larger tip, no attempt to embarrass him. The sentence simply existed, calm and unwavering, like someone placing a mirror on a table and quietly walking away. Ethan leaned closer. "That is all she wrote." Nathan nodded almost absent-mindedly. "That is all." Ethan smiled. "I thought she would call you cheap." Nathan folded the receipt carefully instead of crumpling it. "So did I." Outside, the rain continued painting silver lines across the towering windows while headlights reflected against the wet Manhattan streets below. Inside, the music remained soft, conversations continued, and servers carried polished plates through the elegant dining room with practiced precision. Everything looked exactly as it had 30 minutes earlier, yet something subtle had shifted. Nathan could not explain why one handwritten sentence refused to leave his thoughts. As they walked toward the entrance, guests greeted Nathan with familiar admiration. A venture capitalist congratulated him on a recent acquisition. A real estate developer asked whether he would attend a charity gala the following week. Nathan answered politely, but his attention drifted back toward the dining room. Claire was helping an elderly gentleman button his coat before opening the restaurant door for him. She smiled exactly the same way she had smiled at every other guest that evening. There was no hint that she recognized Nathan watching from across the room. She neither sought acknowledgement nor avoided it. She simply returned to work. "You are thinking too much," Ethan joked as the valet pulled Nathan's black sedan to the curb. It was one sentence from a waitress. Nathan looked through the rain-speckled window before answering. "That is exactly what bothers me." During the drive home, the city lights blurred together as droplets raced across the windshield. Nathan usually reviewed financial reports on the ride back to his penthouse. Tonight the tablet remained closed beside him. Instead, he unfolded the receipt once more. The ink was ordinary. The paper cost almost nothing. Yet the words carried a weight that expensive contracts never had. He remembered growing up with a father who measured success by victories alone. Every conversation had revolved around outperforming competitors, spotting weakness before anyone else, and never allowing emotions to interfere with judgment. Kindness had been described as admirable but inefficient. Humility was praised in speeches, yet rarely practiced in boardrooms. Over time, Nathan had accepted those lessons without questioning them. Success came quickly. Respect followed, or at least what looked like respect. When his car reached the towering glass building overlooking Central Park, the doorman welcomed him by name. The marble lobby shined beneath golden lights. The elevator climbed silently toward the 46th floor. Everything around him reflected extraordinary wealth, yet the folded receipt resting inside his jacket pocket felt strangely heavier than the keys to the entire building. He stepped into his quiet apartment overlooking the sleeping city, loosened his tie, and placed the leather folder on the kitchen counter. Instead of pouring himself the usual glass of sparkling water before bed, he stood motionless beside the panoramic windows. Somewhere downtown, Claire Bennett was probably finishing her shift, wiping tables, stacking menus, and preparing for another ordinary morning. She had no idea that a single sentence written with complete sincerity had followed a billionaire all the way home, refusing to let the evening end where he had expected it to. Nathan slept less than 3 hours that night. It was not because another company had challenged his latest acquisition or because global markets were shifting before sunrise. Those situations belonged to a world he understood. They could be analyzed, measured, and eventually controlled. The quiet sentence written on the back of a restaurant receipt refused to fit inside any formula he had ever trusted. Before the sun rose above Manhattan, he found himself standing beside the wide windows of his office overlooking the Hudson River with a fresh cup of black coffee growing cold in his hand. His executive assistant, Melissa, arrived exactly at 7:30, carrying the schedule that usually dictated every minute of his day. Investor meetings, a conference call with London, lunch with a technology founder, a charity board meeting that evening. Nathan listened without interrupting until she finished. Then he asked a question that caught her completely by surprise. "Melissa, have you ever judged someone too quickly?" She blinked once before answering carefully. "I think everyone has at some point." Nathan nodded slowly but said nothing else. The conversation ended there, yet Melissa noticed something unusual. Normally, he would already be reviewing contracts. Instead, he remained looking toward the skyline, as if searching for something that could not be seen from the 42nd floor. Later that morning, the boardroom, filled with executives wearing tailored suits and confident smiles. Charts illuminated the large screen. Revenue projections climbed upward. Every presentation confirmed another successful quarter. Normally, Nathan challenged every assumption with relentless precision. Today, his attention drifted unexpectedly whenever someone spoke about understanding customers or reading human behavior. The phrase echoed strangely in his mind. Character is always a choice, even when no one is watching. During a short break, his longtime business partner Richard Foster laughed while scrolling through financial headlines. "You look distracted," Richard said. "Do not tell me you are finally taking a vacation." Nathan smiled faintly. "Have you ever wondered whether success makes us less curious about people?" Richard laughed louder. "No. Success gives us the luxury of not having to wonder." The answer should have sounded familiar. Years earlier, Nathan might have agreed without hesitation. Instead, he found himself quietly disagreeing without explaining why. That afternoon, while his driver navigated the busy streets toward another meeting, Nathan noticed something he had overlooked countless times before. A crossing guard greeted every child with the same cheerful wave regardless of what kind of car their parents drove. A construction worker paused to help an elderly woman lift a grocery bag onto the sidewalk without expecting recognition. A street musician thanked every passerby who stopped to listen, whether they left $1 or simply smiled. Small moments, ordinary moments. Yet each one carried the same quiet dignity he had witnessed inside Bellamy House the night before. By early evening, his schedule had ended nearly an hour ahead of plan. His driver glanced through the rearview mirror. "Home, Mr. Carter?" Nathan looked toward the glowing skyline where the restaurant would soon begin another dinner service. He hesitated only briefly. "No, Bellamy House." The driver nodded without asking questions. 20 minutes later, the familiar entrance appeared beneath elegant lanterns reflecting softly against the polished sidewalk after another light rain. Nathan stepped from the car wearing a charcoal overcoat instead of his usual business jacket. For the first time in years, he entered a restaurant without bringing clients, investors, or friends. The hostess recognized him immediately and welcomed him with professional warmth. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. Your usual table." Nathan glanced across the dining room almost instinctively. Claire Bennett was arranging fresh flowers near the center of the room before guests began arriving. She was focused entirely on the small crystal vase in her hands, carefully adjusting a single white lily until it stood perfectly upright. There was something remarkably peaceful about the simple gesture. She had not seen him yet. Nathan realized he had not returned to continue his little experiment. He had returned because, for reasons he still could not fully explain, he wanted to understand the person who had answered his silent test without trying to win it. Claire noticed Nathan only after she finished arranging the flowers and turned toward the front entrance with a welcoming smile she offered every guest. There was no flicker of surprise, no hesitation, and certainly no sign that she remembered him differently from anyone else who walked through the polished glass doors. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," she said warmly. "Welcome back." Nathan found himself caught off guard by the simplicity of her greeting. There was no hidden meaning behind her words. She did not mention the receipt. She did not mention the $5 tip. She simply treated him as another guest deserving of courtesy. "Good evening, Claire," he replied, noticing that saying her name somehow felt more personal than expected. "May I have the same table?" "Of course." She led him across the dining room with measured steps, passing tables where families celebrated birthdays, business partners discussed new ventures, and an older couple quietly shared a bottle of sparkling water while holding hands across the table. Bellamy House seemed to possess an atmosphere that slowed people down without them realizing it. Even Nathan's footsteps became quieter against the polished floor. After handing him a menu, Claire asked whether he would like the chef's seasonal recommendation. Nathan closed the menu without reading it. Actually, I came back because I wanted to ask you something. Claire remained attentive but relaxed. I will answer if I can. Nathan studied her expression for a moment. Why did you write that sentence? She tilted her head slightly, as though making certain she understood the question. Because it was true. You were not offended? She smiled gently. Would being offended have improved either of our evenings? Nathan almost laughed, but the answer settled into silence instead. Claire continued before he could respond. People often believe they are revealing someone else's character. Sometimes they only reveal their own. That is not something to become angry about. It is simply something to notice. Before Nathan could ask another question, a young server hurried toward Claire looking slightly overwhelmed. Table 9 has a guest with a severe dairy allergy, and the kitchen needs clarification before plating the meal. Claire excused herself immediately. Please give me just a moment, Mr. Carter. Nathan watched as she crossed the room with calm efficiency. She knelt beside the family's table to speak directly with the mother, listened carefully without interrupting, thanked her for the information, and personally carried the updated order to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, she returned with complete composure, never once appearing rushed despite the growing dinner crowd. Nathan realized something unexpected. Claire never made anyone feel like an interruption. Every conversation received her full attention, whether she was speaking to a billionaire or to a child deciding between grilled chicken and pasta. Throughout the next hour, he quietly observed instead of checking his phone. A busboy accidentally dropped a tray of polished silverware near the service station. Several diners turned toward the noise. Claire walked over without a trace of irritation, helped him gather every piece, smiled, and quietly said something that made the young man relax almost instantly before returning to work with renewed confidence. Later, an elderly gentleman struggled to read the menu beneath the dim evening lighting. Claire brought him a small reading light from the hostess stand without waiting for him to ask. She never announced her kindness. She simply noticed what others needed. Nathan had spent decades believing leadership meant being the smartest person in every room. Watching Claire, he began to wonder whether true influence looked much quieter than that. When she finally returned to his table with his dinner, Nathan thanked her sincerely. She nodded with the same warm professionalism she had shown every guest all evening. Enjoy your meal, Mr. Carter. As she walked away, Nathan looked around the elegant restaurant once more. No one appeared especially impressed by Claire because they had grown accustomed to the way she treated people. Yet that ordinary consistency suddenly seemed extraordinary. He realized that while he had spent years testing strangers with carefully designed situations, Claire seemed to live every ordinary day according to principles that required no audience, no reward, and no recognition. For the first time in many years, Nathan no longer wanted to prove himself right. He wanted to understand how someone could remain so steady in a world that rewarded appearances far more often than character. The following Tuesday became the third evening Nathan Carter found himself walking through the familiar doors of Bellamy House. Yet this time he arrived almost an hour earlier than usual. The dining room was still quiet. Sunlight lingered against the tall windows, casting long golden reflections across the polished hardwood floors before the dinner rush would transform the restaurant into its nightly rhythm. Claire Bennett was setting fresh linen napkins at each table with the same patient attention she gave every task. She straightened a fork by less than an inch, adjusted the angle of a water glass, then stepped back for a brief second before moving to the next table. Nothing about her movements seemed rushed. Nathan realized she approached ordinary responsibilities with the same care many executives reserved only for million-dollar negotiations. You are here early tonight, Claire said after noticing him near the entrance. I suppose I am, Nathan admitted with an unexpected smile. Would you mind if I waited until my table is ready? Not at all. You are welcome anytime. Instead of sitting immediately, Nathan remained near the front windows, quietly watching employees prepare for another evening. He noticed Claire greeting every coworker by name. She asked the pastry chef how his daughter had enjoyed her school concert. She congratulated a young hostess on passing her college entrance exam. She reminded another server to drink water before the dining room became busy. None of the conversations lasted more than a minute, yet each person walked away looking lighter than before. Nathan wondered how someone with no formal authority could naturally create that effect. A few minutes later, the restaurant manager approached Claire carrying a clipboard. One of our newer servers called in sick. We are going to be stretched thin tonight. Claire nodded calmly. Then I can cover the west section after my own tables are settled. That will make for a very long evening. Claire simply smiled. Sometimes people need help more than they need comfort. Nathan heard the exchange from several feet away. There was no complaint in her voice. No expectation of praise. She accepted the additional work as naturally as someone opening a door for another person. As dinner service began, the restaurant gradually filled with familiar sounds. Soft conversations blended with quiet jazz while polished dishes reflected the warm amber lighting above. Nathan deliberately left his phone inside his jacket pocket. Instead of reviewing market reports, he watched the room. Claire moved from table to table with the same steady pace she always maintained. She never appeared hurried, even when carrying multiple responsibilities. At one point, a nervous young couple quietly counted cash before asking whether they could split one entree because they were celebrating an anniversary on a limited budget. Claire smiled warmly and assured them the chef could prepare two beautifully plated portions at no additional charge. She never made them feel embarrassed. She simply treated their celebration with the same importance as every other guest in the room. Nathan looked away for only a moment before noticing something else. A successful attorney who often visited Bellamy House accidentally left an expensive leather wallet beneath his chair while answering a phone call outside. Claire spotted it immediately. She picked it up, placed it inside the host's stand for safekeeping, and continued serving other guests without opening it or announcing what she had found. Nearly 20 minutes later, the relieved customer returned searching anxiously. Claire handed the wallet back with a gentle smile. Everything should still be exactly as you left it. The man opened it briefly before offering her several $100 bills in gratitude. Claire politely shook her head. Your thanks is more than enough. I was only returning something that already belonged to you. The customer insisted again. Claire thanked him sincerely, but declined once more before returning to another table that needed fresh coffee. Nathan sat perfectly still. He had spent years believing that integrity became visible only when temptation was large enough. Tonight he witnessed something different. Claire did not hesitate before making the honorable choice because, for her, it was never a decision at all. It was simply the natural extension of who she had become. As she passed his table a few minutes later, Nathan quietly asked, "Has anyone ever told you that you make difficult things look easy?" Claire paused just long enough to answer with a thoughtful smile. Only because they usually do not see the practice that came before the moment. Those words stayed with Nathan long after she disappeared into the gentle rhythm of another ordinary evening, leaving him with the growing realization that character was not built during extraordinary moments. It was quietly rehearsed through thousands of ordinary ones until goodness became a habit instead of a performance. Over the next 2 weeks, Nathan quietly changed one habit after another without announcing any of it to the people around him. He still attended every board meeting, approved every major investment, and negotiated every important contract. Yet something subtle had shifted beneath the polished surface of his routine. He found himself listening longer before speaking. He interrupted people less often. He even noticed the names of employees who had worked in his headquarters for years without ever receiving more than a passing nod. His assistant, Melissa, was the first to recognize the difference. One morning, she entered his office carrying the usual stack of reports and paused when she saw Nathan standing beside the coffee station, speaking with the overnight maintenance supervisor. They were not discussing business. Nathan was asking about the man's wife, who had recently undergone knee surgery. When the supervisor thanked him for remembering, genuine surprise filled his voice. After the man left, Melissa smiled quietly. "You have never asked me about my family before this month." Nathan looked down at the cup in his hands. "I suppose I spent too many years believing efficiency was more valuable than attention." Melissa answered softly. "Sometimes attention is the most valuable thing we give another person." Her words followed him throughout the day. That evening, Nathan returned to Bellamy House once again, but this visit felt different from the previous ones. He no longer arrived searching for answers about Claire. Instead, he simply enjoyed watching the quiet rhythm of the restaurant. He noticed details he would once have ignored. The chef personally greeted a dishwasher celebrating 10 years with the restaurant. The hostess remembered the favorite table of a widow who visited every Thursday evening. Claire somehow managed to encourage everyone around her without becoming the center of attention herself. During a brief lull between tables, Nathan asked if she had a few minutes. Claire nodded and joined him near the large window overlooking the softly lit street where people hurried beneath umbrellas after another gentle rain. "May I ask you something personal?" Nathan said. Claire considered the question before answering. "You may ask. Whether I answer depends on the question." Nathan smiled. "That seems fair." He hesitated before continuing. "You seem remarkably at peace. Were you always like this?" Claire looked through the window for a long moment before speaking. "Not at all. I used to believe that proving people wrong would finally make me happy. I spent years trying to earn respect from people who had already decided who I was. Eventually, I became exhausted." Nathan remained silent. Claire continued with the same calm honesty that had become so familiar. "One day I realized something important. I could spend my life convincing strangers to value me, or I could spend it becoming someone I respected when I looked in the mirror. Only one of those choices was actually within my control." Nathan lowered his eyes. Those words settled deeper than she could have known. His entire career had been built upon proving himself stronger, smarter, faster, and wealthier than everyone who doubted him. Even after achieving extraordinary success, he had never truly stopped seeking validation. Claire had chosen a completely different path. She measured herself by internal standards instead of public applause. Before either of them could say another word, an elderly gentleman entered the restaurant carrying a worn coat that was still damp from the rain. Claire immediately excused herself with an apologetic smile and welcomed him as though greeting an old friend. Nathan watched from a distance as she guided the man to his favorite corner table without asking whether he wanted it. She already knew. A few minutes later, she placed a warm bowl of soup in front of him before he even opened the menu. The gentleman's grateful smile revealed that this quiet ritual had likely happened many times before. Nathan suddenly understood why Claire never seemed rushed despite everything she accomplished. She was never performing kindness. She was simply living according to habits that had become part of her character. Watching her from across the softly glowing dining room, Nathan realized that the greatest lesson he had received all year had not come from a leadership seminar, a best-selling business book, or a billion-dollar negotiation. It had arrived disguised as ordinary conversations inside a restaurant where one woman quietly reminded people, one simple act at a time, that dignity was never something money could purchase, only something character could patiently build. Autumn gradually surrendered to early winter, and the familiar rhythm of Bellamy House became an unexpected part of Nathan Carter's life. He no longer counted how many evenings he returned. Some nights he stayed for a full dinner. Other times he simply ordered a cup of coffee before heading back to the office. The employees had stopped treating him like an unusual guest. He had quietly become part of the restaurant's weekly routine. Yet there was one thing that never changed. Claire Bennett greeted him with exactly the same warmth she offered everyone else. She never gave him a better table because he was wealthy. She never lingered longer at his side than she did with any other guest. At first, Nathan wondered whether she was intentionally maintaining professional distance. Eventually, he realized something much simpler. Fairness was one of her habits. She did not adjust her character according to another person's status. One Thursday evening, a heavy snow began falling just before sunset, covering the sidewalks in a blanket of white that softened the usual sounds of Manhattan traffic. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere felt warmer than ever. Families escaped the cold together. Friends laughed over bowls of soup. Couples lingered over dessert while snowflakes drifted lazily beyond the tall windows. Nathan was finishing his meal when he noticed Claire quietly remove her apron during a brief break. Instead of sitting down to rest, she picked up 2 paper bags from the kitchen and slipped outside through the side entrance. Curiosity overcame him. Without disturbing anyone, he rose from his table and watched through the window. Across the street, beneath the awning of a closed bookstore, sat an elderly man wrapped in a faded coat. Claire walked directly toward him with an easy smile, handed him one of the bags, then sat beside him for several minutes as though they had known each other for years. Nathan could not hear their conversation through the glass, but he saw the old man's tired face brighten with genuine joy. After a while, Claire stood, adjusted the scarf around the gentleman's neck because the wind had loosened it, and returned to the restaurant carrying the empty paper bag. She entered through the side door, washed her hands, tied her apron back on, and resumed serving guests as though nothing remarkable had happened. She never mentioned the encounter. She never looked around to see whether anyone had noticed. Nathan quietly stepped away from the window before she returned to the dining room. A few minutes later, the restaurant manager, Daniel, stopped beside Nathan's table to ask whether everything had been satisfactory. Nathan nodded before casually asking, "Does Claire know the gentleman across the street?" Daniel smiled knowingly. "Mr. Henderson. Every Thursday for almost 3 years." Nathan looked up with quiet surprise. "She has been helping him that long?" "Longer than I have worked here," Daniel replied. "She always prepares an extra meal before her break. Sometimes she buys him warm gloves. Sometimes books from the used bookstore nearby. Last Christmas, several of us wanted to organize a fundraiser after we learned what she had been doing, but she politely asked us not to. She said kindness becomes smaller the moment it starts asking for applause." Daniel excused himself to greet another guest, leaving Nathan alone with thoughts that refused to settle. He slowly looked around the dining room. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath elegant lights. Expensive watches rested on polished tables. Quiet conversations floated through the air. Just beyond the warm windows sat one elderly man who had unknowingly become part of Claire's weekly routine without ever appearing in photographs, newspaper articles, or social media posts. Nathan suddenly remembered every charitable donation his company had announced with press releases and cameras. They had certainly helped people, but they had also strengthened the company's public image. Claire's kindness existed even when nobody knew about it, especially then. As she returned to refill his coffee, Nathan looked at her with a respect that had grown far beyond curiosity. "You seem to know everyone," he said softly. Claire smiled as she placed the warm cup before him. "Not everyone," she answered. "Just enough people to remember that every person is carrying something invisible." Nathan watched the steam rise gently from the coffee between them. For the first time in his adult life, he realized he had spent years searching for extraordinary people in extraordinary places, when the person who had quietly changed the direction of his thinking had simply been living an ordinary life with extraordinary consistency. Winter settled over Manhattan with quiet confidence, and one evening the first lights of the holiday season reflected across the wide windows of Bellamy House. The restaurant glowed with warmth while snow drifted gently outside, turning the busy sidewalks into soft ribbons of white. Nathan Carter had come to appreciate evenings like this more than any gala or corporate celebration. For nearly 2 months, Bellamy House had become the one place where nobody cared how many companies he owned or how many headlines carried his name. They simply cared whether he enjoyed his meal. As he finished dinner, he noticed Claire speaking softly with Daniel near the service station. She glanced toward the reservation book, nodded, and then disappeared into the kitchen before returning a few moments later carrying a neatly wrapped package no larger than a hardcover novel. Instead of placing it beneath the restaurant's decorated tree, she quietly set it inside a cabinet near the entrance. Nathan waited until she returned with fresh coffee before asking, "Is someone celebrating a birthday tonight?" Claire smiled. "Not exactly." "Then what is the gift for?" She hesitated for a moment, not because she wished to hide the answer, but because she seemed to be deciding whether it mattered. "Every December we keep a few wrapped presents here. Sometimes families arrive unexpectedly with children after travel plans change. Sometimes someone forgets a gift. Sometimes life simply becomes complicated. If a child leaves here smiling because we happen to have something ready, that is enough." Nathan looked toward the cabinet again. "Who pays for them?" Claire shrugged gently. "Different people over the years. I usually start the collection." Before Nathan could respond, the front door opened and a young couple hurried inside, carrying several shopping bags and holding the hands of 2 children who looked no older than 7. The younger boy's eyes filled with tears almost immediately. Nathan could hear only fragments of the conversation. A delayed train, lost luggage, gifts accidentally left behind. The parents smiled bravely for their children, but disappointment rested quietly behind their eyes. Claire listened without interrupting. Then she excused herself for less than a minute. She returned carrying one of the wrapped presents Nathan had noticed earlier and knelt to the younger boy's eye level. I heard someone told me there is a very brave traveler here tonight, she said with a warm smile. Sometimes long trips deserve a little surprise. The little boy looked toward his parents for permission before carefully opening the package. Inside was a simple wooden train painted in bright colors. Nothing expensive, nothing extravagant. Yet the child's face transformed with such genuine delight that even nearby diners smiled without realizing they were watching. His older sister received a small sketchbook and colored pencils from another package hidden inside the cabinet. The parents thanked Claire repeatedly, but she simply wished them a peaceful evening and returned to helping other guests. Nathan remained silent long after the family settled into their booth. He finally understood something that had escaped him for years. Claire never waited until she saw a problem before deciding to be generous. She prepared for kindness in advance. She anticipated moments when hope might be needed and quietly made room for them long before anyone asked. As the evening slowed, Nathan asked whether she had ever considered doing something else with her life. Running a business, leading an organization, teaching leadership. Claire laughed softly, the sound almost blending with the gentle music drifting through the dining room. People ask that sometimes. And what do you tell them? She rested one hand lightly against the back of an empty chair before answering. I tell them that titles describe positions. They do not describe purpose. Right now, this is where I can serve people well. If that changes one day, I will follow it. But I have learned not to confuse importance with visibility. Nathan lowered his eyes, absorbing every word. Throughout his career, he had climbed higher, believing purpose waited somewhere above the next achievement. Claire had quietly discovered hers exactly where she stood. As he prepared to leave that evening, he slipped a thick envelope from the inside pocket of his coat. It contained a personal check large enough to change almost anyone's financial situation, along with a handwritten note thanking Claire for changing the way he viewed success. He held the envelope in his hands for several seconds, then looked toward her as she patiently helped another guest into a winter coat. Something inside him quietly shifted. He returned the envelope to his pocket unopened. For the first time, Nathan realized that generosity offered to ease his own conscience would never equal generosity offered with genuine understanding. If he wished to honor everything Claire had taught him without ever intending to teach, he would have to become a different man first. Money could follow later. Character had to come before the gift. The first snowfall of January arrived quietly, covering the city with a fresh layer of white that softened even the busiest corners of Manhattan. Bellamy House looked almost timeless beneath its warm lights, welcoming familiar guests who sought comfort from the winter evening. Nathan Carter stepped inside carrying no envelope, no carefully prepared speech, and no hidden intention. For the first time since he had walked through those doors months earlier, he was not searching for another lesson. He was simply grateful to be there. Claire greeted him with the same genuine smile she had offered on every previous visit. Good evening, Mr. Carter. Nathan returned the smile with one that came more naturally than ever before. Good evening, Claire. She escorted him to his table, wished him an enjoyable evening, and continued serving the growing number of guests filling the dining room. Watching her move through the restaurant, Nathan realized something that would have sounded impossible to the man he had once been. He no longer wanted to be the most important person in every room. He wanted to become the kind of person whose presence quietly made every room better. Dinner passed peacefully. Families laughed together. Glasses clinked gently beneath the chandeliers. Snowflakes drifted outside like silent reminders that even the busiest city could become still for a moment. When Nathan finished his meal, he opened the leather folder containing his check. This time he reached for his pen without hesitation. He left a generous tip, not because he wished to impress anyone, not because he expected gratitude, and certainly not because he hoped to erase the memory of that first evening. He left it because generosity had finally become an expression instead of a performance. Before closing the folder, he turned the receipt over. Months earlier, Claire had written a sentence that had quietly changed the direction of his life. Tonight, he wrote one of his own. His handwriting remained steady as he finished the final word. He stood, walked toward the entrance, and prepared to leave without drawing attention to himself. Just before he reached the door, Claire approached with her usual calm expression. "Thank you for spending another evening with us," she said warmly. Nathan paused. "No, Claire. Thank you." She tilted her head slightly, recognizing that his words carried more meaning than the conversation itself. Take care, Mr. Carter. You as well. Neither of them mentioned the receipt resting on the table. Neither of them needed to. After Nathan left, Claire continued serving guests until the final reservation had finished dessert. The last candles were extinguished. Chairs were carefully placed upside down on polished tables. Soft music faded into silence as the staff completed their closing routines. Only then did Claire collect the leather folder from Nathan's table. She opened it to organize the receipt before preparing it for the evening's records. The generous tip caught her attention for only a second. Then, she turned the receipt over and found a short handwritten note. Months ago, I believed I was testing a stranger. I understand now that I was meeting a teacher who never knew she was teaching. Thank you for reminding me that wealth is measured by what we build inside ourselves before it is ever measured by what we own. Claire read the words once, folded the receipt carefully, and smiled to herself. She did not frame it. She did not tell her coworkers. She quietly placed it inside the same notebook where she kept meaningful memories collected over the years. There were thank you notes from military families, children's drawings, anniversary cards from elderly couples, and letters from guests whose difficult days had been made a little lighter by ordinary kindness. Nathan's note became just one more page among many. As Claire switched off the final light and stepped into the peaceful winter night, she never imagined how many lives Nathan's quiet transformation would eventually touch. Over the following months, employees throughout his companies noticed small changes that slowly became lasting ones. Managers were encouraged to learn the names and stories of every member of their teams. Anonymous scholarship funds quietly appeared for employees' children. Community programs received support without public announcements. Success continued, but it was no longer the only measure Nathan cared about. Years later, whenever young entrepreneurs asked him what investment had produced the greatest return of his career, they expected him to name a company, a technology, or a bold financial decision. Nathan always smiled before giving the same unexpected answer. The greatest investment I ever made cost $5. The return changed the person making the investment. Somewhere across the city, Claire continued arranging flowers before dinner, greeting strangers with genuine warmth, and treating every ordinary moment as another opportunity to practice the kind of character that required no audience. And perhaps that was the quiet truth both of them had discovered. Money can open doors, create opportunities, and change circumstances, but only character has the power to change. A human heart, and sometimes the most valuable lesson in a lifetime, arrives wrapped inside the smallest gesture, waiting patiently for someone willing to see it.